So, so hi everyone. As you all know, we have gone into a new series in Be Heard podcast. So today I'm here with Mahum, who is also a teacher, a lawyer, and also a political commentator based in Colombo. So she's born in Pakistan, and she's also a writer for the Daily Times in Pakistan and the Friday Times Pakistan as well. She's also a teacher in a leading international school in Colombo. So I'm happy to hear to speak about the current affairs and how active she is on social media platforms. So I urge you all to go check her out. All right. So how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for inviting me, Lakshan. I'm really happy to be on your podcast and having this chat with you today. Always a good idea to exchange ideas all the time.
Right. So you had mentioned to me about certain topics that you would like to address, that on how youth engagement and how social media plays a vital role, and how pandemic situations are changing people's mindsets. Maybe you could shed some light on how the youth are affected at the moment. With now, you, since you are a teacher, I think if we are to speak about the aspect of a teacher's point of view, and how you being a teacher, and now with this lockdown, it's all online. So what is the
Yeah.
productivity of it? Do you feel like these children are actually paying attention to you? Like, what maybe also you can point out, like how you will encourage children to be engaged on social media, rather like on through Zoom or some sort of platform to learn.
True. True. Thank you for that question. I think that obviously our idea of this normal has just been completely, shattered by the pandemic. Since last year, we went into curfew in Sri Lanka in March last year. And then since then, we never really went back to normal school. As I teach at one of the leading international schools in Colombo, I know that our students have basically, they've adapted to the situation very, very well, which is why I think that the youth of any country are just the most resilient, because they're still growing. And for them, for a lot of them, especially the younger ones, this will be what they remember as normal. They will always remember that we had to grow up wearing masks, and we had to grow up having our lessons online and on a computer screen. So I think for the most part, the school that I'm at, we're very lucky. We have the resources, the students and the parents are very supportive of the process. So it has been good. However, on a large scale, I think in the country and across the globe, there have been a lot of challenges when it comes to online learning, because my favorite part of teaching is having that engagement with people, with young people. So being able to look at them, being able to gauge their body language to see if they understand something, if they don't, you can't really do that through a screen. So we use Microsoft Teams at our school, and so it works very well. It's a very, very efficient and smooth running process. However, of course, I miss them. I miss having a chat in the corridors and say, oh, how are you? How's your day? How's your family? So those are the things that we miss. But at the same time, coming to your other point of how you mentioned, that I wanted to touch on how social media is playing a really active role in everyone's lives, because social media is not only keeping us all connected, it's also keeping us all informed. And I think in this day and age with young people, when we were growing up, I don't think that we had access to platforms like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, more recently TikTok. One I haven't been brave enough to join just yet, but those are the newspapers of the youth, so to speak. But I see now in my students, whether they're at a year 7 or year 8 level to the A level students, I think that they use social media as a tool to communicate very effectively. But I do think that the one thing we as educators and as kind of an older generation should be promoting within the youth is, it's also an absolutely invaluable tool for them to understand what's going on in the world.
Right.
And just based on that, I think a lot of us know always what's going on in the US, what's going on in Europe, what's going on in the developed nations, so to speak. But when it comes to what's going on at home in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, in Gampaha, in Jaffna, in Gaul, we don't always have the same level of interest and engagement when it comes to kind of domestic information, domestic news, which is
Right.
why I think social media accounts are very, very powerful. I know your account, I know several other accounts that I follow. They're so informative, you know? They give us the information as to what's going on daily. So I think that as an educator, just as someone who deals with young people, I think I really encourage children to go and also interact and engage with accounts which provide them with information about the things that impact their daily lives. It's just as important to know what's happening as it is to post a picture of your food or your face. You know, that's great, but we should know and we should keep more informed, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yes, social media is actually my go-to. Like, like there's so many platforms out there. Like an individual can either be formed up or can be highly destroyed solely because of the reputations on how social media works. So you also mentioned how young people now are on social media for information, but
Yes.
don't you also feel that social media can be a very harsh place for the young? Young or old, there's a lot of threats going around. There's cyber attacks, and also there could be also, like, discrimination socially, and
True.
that can also play a big role when it comes to the next generation, because you're a teacher and you know how the younger generation thinks. And like, what do you have to say, like, when a young kid is going through some sort of a social trauma or some sort of a bullying happening socially, like, how, like, what sort of a source that a young person could get to come and tell you, like, do you think that the younger generation will come and tell a teacher that I'm being bullied online?
That's an excellent question, actually. And I think it's being addressed a lot more often within the school systems in Sri Lanka currently. I know I can speak for that because we have colleagues in other schools, my own colleagues at my own place of work. We have very, very strict policies in place for online bullying. And I know that throughout the time that our students kind of are online, it's just as important now for us to get the training to ensure that they are safe in an online space the same way they would be safe in a physical space. Because I think, like you said, with the rise of use in social media, I think it's become very easy to become a troll, you know. I don't think if I met you face to face and I had a problem with you, I would have the guts to tell you to your face all the things I can tell you if I can go create an anonymous account and message it to you instead. And I think that's the kind of awareness that we are slowly trickling down into the school system, where we are telling people, if you are being bullied, make sure you tell us, and they do. There is a lot of parental support and supervision. There are children who are very, very happy to treat us like a safe space and tell us, Miss, this is happening. This is what I'm facing. At the same time, though, because social media is this entire galaxy of kind of interaction that can't be monitored all the time, if you're a parent or a teacher or an adult, you can safeguard a child by saying, don't go there. That's a dark alleyway in the middle of the night. Don't go there. There might be danger there. But when it's social media, you can't always monitor what your child is clicking on. And you can't always monitor where your child is going and what they're interacting with online. So all you can do is create awareness and teach them about the dangers that are out there. But I think more than anything, in the real world, we try and protect children from physical harm. Whereas in the digital space where we all exist now, even this interview has to be conducted like this because of the pandemic, we don't realize that it's taken a huge mental impact on us. So, mental health, I think, especially over the last 1.5 years, has really, really been a very talked about topic. And it should be, because I think with the excess of information as well, there should always be a balance created. But sometimes there's always too much information coming at you because you never know when you can unplug. And that's the danger of social media. So, to answer your question, for me, I think overexposure to information, overexposure to websites that maybe you should limit your amount of time on, bullying. You can see even with celebrities these days globally. how impacted they are. The second they can't hear all the criticism on Twitter anymore, they deactivate and they go off and they take a social media detox and cleanse.
Right.
So I think people have become braver, but
Mm.
I also think, unfortunately, there is a section of society globally that has also become a lot meaner. I think it's easier to say things that are hurtful
Right.
because we have a screen protecting us. But having said that, I know countries all over the world, including in Sri Lanka, are putting into place cybercrime units. I know we have people from within government coming to schools and giving seminars and workshops and making us aware that, should you face this, this, and this, it is now a crime. You can take action against people threatening you, or doing things which are basically against cybercrime laws. So that's excellent, but I do think it will take a lot more time for all of this framework to actually become properly effective, because we're still evolving and we're still we're still existing in this time, really. So it's like a learning process, really. But I do agree. I think that there are downsides, like to everything. I think to social media as well. There are definite negatives that come with it, but it's all about how we use it.
Right. You mentioned a great point which just triggered in me, and I actually took note. You mentioned how it's much easier to create a fake account and like blur it out there rather than telling it face to face. So what if Sri Lanka comes up with this great national plan where there is like a site where you can go into, and it's an anonymous complaining bullet, like a center where you just have to anonymously complain. So each time, now let's say even I myself, I log in twice. Let's say I complain once, I complain the second time, it will still go as anonymous XO1, XO2. Each time I send in something, we ask nothing from you. We don't ask you about your name, your who you are, whatever. Just write the complaint with the right stats. Like, screenshots can be attached, like, links can be put in. I think that's a great initiative that we can also start, I think.
So you're just to clarify, you're talking about like complaining about things that are happening in the country. Is that what you
Right.
mean?
Yeah. Country or personal complaints, like, let's say I've been harassed online and I need help. So for without me attending to go to a psychologist or explaining such a thing or going to some sort of a mentor or asking for help, I can just get into this site where it's government protected. There I put in, like, let's say I'm the victim here. So I go in, I'll be like, hey, look, I've been attacked through social media. This particular person messaged me in harassed way. He sends me this image which is inappropriate. So I think that sort of a safe space should be created now. I think
I
now
mean,
more than ever.
yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very important thing to have safe spaces. I think that it's also a good idea to think about how feasible that is in terms of, I mean, I'm sure all of us, I don't think I know even one person, not you, not me, not anyone else who hasn't been at the receiving end of messages that are critical in nature. So then we also need to know that I love your idea of having like this kind of chamber of voices, like you're saying, be heard. So again, it would be a forum where you're being heard. I think that's a great idea. I also, would think what would be kind of the structures that need to be put into place to make sure that then something happens. Like I can give you an example. In Pakistan, Imran Khan just started the Prime Minister's hotline recently.
Right.
So what he said is there's a number, and if you have any issue at all, whether that's a land dispute or an issue with the government department or a personal issue or someone's threatening you, you just dial that hotline. And I think if we could do the same thing here, that would be effective as well. Absolutely. I think anywhere where people can be heard and have their voice heard is a great idea. I think it could even work if you weren't anonymous, because I think if you were anonymous, how would anyone try and help you, so maybe it couldn't be anonymous. As long as it's a government protected safe space, then maybe I think it's a good idea to have your voice heard. Absolutely.
Right. So moving on, like, we spoke about how social media plays a vital role and how we can eliminate it. But don't you feel that, there is now too much of news? Because
Hmm.
people are stuck at home, and now we are seeing a lot of things. Like, there's a lot of scenarios happening globally. And like, how would you say, like, with this too much news that we are getting, like, how sort of a filtration process do you feel is best? Like, what's your point of view on that?
That's a really good question. And I know a lot of my friends and a lot of family, sometimes, on our WhatsApp chats or on phone conversations, everyone always says, "Oh, I don't want to know. I've been talking about this all day and I've been listening to this all day and I've been seeing it all day. And I don't want to know. I don't want to know." I think that we're also falling into this dangerous trap where it's very easy to kind of become an ostrich, and put your blinders on and just think, okay, I want to distance myself. I think that there was always too much news. Even in the 1940s and the 1950s, we always had newspapers. We always had the news being reported. Now we just have more access to it. But I think as human beings, we have lost this ability to self regulate. So earlier on, our parents would wake up in the morning to drop us to school and they would watch, the news on the TV, get to know what's going on, and then they would go about their day and do things. Then they would come back in the evening. Maybe in the evening before sleeping, we'd switch on the TV again and watch a bit of news and go to sleep. Now, because we live in this digital age where we are basically obsessed with this and we're always on this, we're not making time to talk to each other. We are not making time to do the other things that, maybe our parents and grandparents used to do, that we think it's too much. That's because we have lost the ability to self regulate our own behavior. So I think even now, even if I decide, what, my day to go, the time during the day for me to go on Twitter is going to be between 12 and 3 p.m. every day. That's the only time I'm going to check Twitter. That's the only time I'm going to check the news. After that, I'm not. It won't feel too much to me if I make those rules for myself. But these days, I think everything is too much. We want to go out too much. We want to stay at home too much. We don't want to do anything on our own too much. So a lot of anything is a bad thing. So it's all about how we regulate. But you are right. I think in terms of it's also about who you follow now, right? So if I follow someone who's only giving me the bad news all day, every day, I'm going to end up very depressed. So I need to make an effort to make sure that I'm also following a balanced stream of people.
Right.
Am I keeping up with what's happening in pop culture as well as what's happening in the news? So I do think it comes down to us, but we've become very, very robotic now. We're used to people telling us how to live our lives, and now because we don't have any routine, we are only scrolling and falling into depression and then blaming it on the information. The problem is not the information, the problem is self-regulation, I think.
Right. Yeah. I think I would rephrase the word you said on how we filter bad news and good news. I would change the word bad news to false information, because there's
Okay,
so much false information right now online, and
true.
so you pointed out real good points with regards to that as well, because now we are solely somewhat blinded to how social Western worlds are, like, because we also have to understand that we are a growing nation, Sri Lanka. So we need to be known for, like, what the outcomes, the repercussions from external nations can affect us. I also
True.
personally feel, because I'm also part of the United Nations and so many organizations. So people ask me also, like, how do I manage my time? So I think work and time has to be managed by oneself, So like how you
Exactly.
mentioned, like Twitter, you're going from 12 to 3. So that is something which I really can't do. I cannot regulate my social media intake, because I personally don't even watch the news. I do not
Yeah.
watch the news because I get the news way before it goes on the telly. So because of that, like, I think it varies from person to person and what role you're playing. But I also feel that that we need to address more out of the country situations, because people are sort of fed up of hearing what's internally, and some people just discard it, like, this always happens when every government comes, it always happens, you know so I think maybe you can point out a few, because you're in an international school, forum, and you're already an inside with international students, maybe, or maybe students who are speaking certain different languages, because an international school hosts like foreign languages as well, like French, Italian, German, all this. So I think maybe you could shed some light on how um, foreign news is also important for our domestic updates, because then we know, like, whether the dollar is,
Absolutely, yeah.
whether the dollar is going to inflate, or what sort of climate issues could come up. So, like, what is your take on, like, social media need, and our local news has to address foreign news?
I mean, it's that's a very, very good question that you've asked me, and it's something that I've recently started thinking about a lot more. I think even in a school context, absolutely. I think international schools, sure, we give our students the options to study French and German and Mandarin and learn about cultures. But I know that local schools and the local school system is a very strong one as well, and I know that they, while they may not provide options for studying foreign languages, I do know that they teach a lot of the context, of the context in which students in Sri Lanka are living. And I think that in a school context, yes, of course, students have exposure to that kind of international flavor of things. But I think more importantly, the responsibility of that does lie on the media as well. And I think I started writing and contributing to a local newspaper a few months ago. It's been about a month and a half, and I contribute to publications in Pakistan as well. And I think the one thing that I stressed on was that I want to cover global affairs. Yes, I can write about what's happening here for the newspaper here, but everyone is doing that. And everyone, and I also think that media houses sometimes tend to be quite biased in their agendas, if we're being a little bit blunt. It all depends. I can speak of my home country, Pakistan. There's 47 news channels, and it all depends on who owns them, and that's how the news is kind of delivered. So it's all about, okay, is this news channel owner friends with the government or against the government? Based on that is going to be the tone of our news. They call it the news, but is it really? And even over here, I sense, I think that's in every country. I think media bias is a thing that I've addressed in some of the articles I've written as well. What's important is, yes, like I started off saying, it's very important to be aware of what's happening in your country, but it's also important to know how what's happening in other countries is affecting what's happening in your country. So you need to know the politics surrounding what's happening in India, what's happening in China, what's happening in the US, for the context of Sri Lanka. So when you're learning what's happening in those countries and how they're trading with you, or how their foreign policy is affecting yours, you're thinking about it in the context of, okay, in 5 to 10 years, how is this going to affect my life? I think about it like that. If this is the country I've spent the majority of my life, except 3 years, I've spent it here. And therefore, it does worry me. Where is the dollar going? Like you mentioned, the dollar inflation. What's going to happen to the economy? How are we going to sustain livelihoods? Now, things like that, I think, are things that the youth nowadays thinks, oh, this is a problem for the future. Of course it is. Nobody's asking them to understand microeconomics at 15. But at the same time, the more they engage with that, and also news channels and media and people who are giving the news out have a responsibility to make it simple. I'm not saying break it down and write in very easy sentences, but what I mean is make it easily digestible. Because when news channels have interviews with professors from, who are very, very accomplished, but if they're coming out there and giving all this technical jargon and trying to explain things in such an overly complicated way, the youth is A, going to lose interest, and B, not going to understand what's happening. So, in a day and age when we have social media and we have the 140 character limits on Twitter, make it easily digestible. So the news itself, I think, engage with what's happening globally, but the way we report it should be in a way where it is relevant to the country that you're living in. So if I'm finding out about I'm just off the top of my head mentioning the Black Lives Matter movement. if I am invested in that, or if I'm invested in Palestine and Israel, these are all important issues in the world. But I need to think, okay, how does this impact Sri Lanka? Is this also happening here? Can I help in any way? I can change my profile picture to support those people, but can I apply that thought process to my country here? Can I help people who are in a similar situation? I think that's what we're lacking. We're kind of lacking the application and the empathy. And I think we can think about that a little more. How is what is happening in X, Y, or Z also similar to what's happening here? Which is why I think we don't learn from history. We keep repeating it because we don't care to remember what's happened. Everyone is kind of running after power, running after self interest, running after personal gain. And they don't stop to think, oh, this has already happened and look how badly it happened last time. So I think that yes, global affairs are very important, but linking it back to the very first thing I said, what's most important is also being aware of what's happening here, because Sri Lanka hasn't had an easy 2 weeks. It's been one thing after another. It's been environmental disaster, it's been pandemic, it's been lockdown open, lockdown closed. We don't really know. So it's very, very important to be informed of what's happening here and also take what's happening elsewhere as an example on how we can improve. I think that's my take on it.
Yeah, so that's right. I mean, now even when you were mentioning how social media and stuff, like how unbiased and biased news medias. So now I don't want to get this more political, but we all know that the outcome of Sri Lanka with the GSP is solely because the European Union has already spoken in their parliament, saying it's all because of how people are disappearing. You Google and say the most disappeared people in a country, it's Sri Lanka. So it's because of those misconduct of military sort of a dictatorial governance is what is affecting this GSP plus. So then we know the repercussions of it, that the dollar rate could increase up to 300 plus for a Sri Lankan rupee. So now my biggest question is, because I am also new and upcoming a young representative for the government and for the future generations, when I see that, because I'm also involved in foreign affairs, so when I hear such, the European Union made a point out that this is the sole reason, I don't know why a government must still continue it. So, which is also weird how you mentioned, like, we keep on continuing history rather than making it. So
True.
I think those are the points what our media has to at least try to, because if not, in the end of the day, it's just like, hand to mouth, it's every day from morning 8 to 5. That's the workload. That's it. So
I think it's interesting you would mention that. Again, trying not to get too political or commenting on you. Obviously, you have your party affiliations, and I am quite neutral as I live in this country. And I think the way that I choose to conduct my political opinions is that if somebody is doing something that's positive, I will give them the credit for the positive thing that's happening. If something that is negative is being conducted, I will call it out for being negative. Because obviously, you have more of a stake in this being a citizen. Um, However, when it comes to things like GSP Plus and like the EU passing judgment, and maybe this is my inherent bias that's going to come out here in what I'm about to say, but I do think that countries within the EU, the US not taking countries like Pakistan off the FATF gray list because of, they're not, and with us over here with the GSP Plus, I think we also need to kind of keep in mind that the people who are regulating us, who is regulating them? Because I'm not entirely sure that a lot of these decisions are based purely for human rights reasons or based purely for the goodness of mankind. I think that they are all entrenched in politics at the end of the day. So, I take your point, and I think that disappearances in any country are not a good thing. Journalistic freedoms must be protected. I also see on my news feeds, again, this is a completely personal opinion. And of course, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who will disagree. But I think on my news feeds, I see a lot of my friends, who have very, very, very polarized, differing political opinions. Some support the government, others don't. Some are activists, some are human rights workers, NGO workers. I think, in as far as I see, and I know I speak from a very privileged point of view, I think that there is the ability to speak freely. I mean, the fact that you are mentioning the things that you have an issue with on this podcast and on this video shows that there is a certain degree and extent of freedom that you enjoy. I'm not saying everybody enjoys it, but I am saying that it is there. So at the same time, I do think that we also, as the youth of any country, need to question why we need the EU, or why we need any external force to kind of try and regulate what we are doing. I think a civil society in its own should be so strong that they can call out the government of the day, whoever that might be, because Sri Lanka's been having a tough few years. In the last few years, I think economically it has been difficult. And we have seen a change in government. So, of course, one side will point fingers on the other. I don't think it's doing very well right now, 100%. But at the same time, I think that pandemic relatedly, all the countries are basically in a really, really tight spot. So, but you're right. What we do need to have is accountability, and what we do need to have is a forum where our voices would be heard, and we do need to have a media that reports that completely unbiasedly. I'm going to take this back to the Palestine and Israel conflict now, actually, where I wrote an article recently where the Western media reports it as if it's Hamas attacking the poor Israeli civilians. You know what I mean? So it's the way it's reported, right? So the same way the EU is basing its reports for the GSP plus on what the reports they have, I'm sure there's a lot of people who disagree in this country and other countries for how the FATF regulates Pakistan, etc. Again, we can have differing opinions, and I'm sure we do. But I think we also need to, now it's about time globally, we need to question who has the right to question who, because he who does not have sin shall cast the first stone. Right. But is there actually anyone in the world who has the capacity to do that? I don't really know anymore.
Right. I think that's more like, geopolitics and regional politics as well. Because you mentioned how the EU is not catering towards Pakistan. And I think it's also because it's two powerful nations fighting across the globe, China and America. So those two nations, they are just trying to fight their way in. And it's the small nations that is actually suffering here. So I saw a post recently. I was just pulling it up as you were speaking. It says COVID-19 did not break the system, but COVID-19 exposed the broken system. And it blew my mind, like, knowing that, wow, we have been so narrow-minded, politically, like one-sided, and not looking at a bigger picture, and like, now coming to think of regional politics, like, again, we don't want to make this more political, but it's just that China plays a major role in the South Asian region, and them trying to invest their way through Silk routes and taking up Hambantota, Port City, and even Pakistan, for example. I think they have one of the biggest hydro plants there. So all these investments is with a different motives to it. So we must be as the next generation. I can speak for the next generation. We must think like, what is the outcome of it? Right now, presently, I think we have enough and more people fighting and arguing. Yes, that is money. We need money now. Let's take it. But what is the repercussions for the next generation is what we need to actually address now. And again, going back to the bias of media, I think media plays a vital role. But also the people who take it, even the politicians who hear it, they have a greater responsibility on creating the area, the networks, the regional politics rather, into a more peaceful nation to go about. So like that, like, I think we can pull back to regional politics with the Black Lives Movement and all these things again. But maybe do you want to shed some light on how regional politics is affecting and what needs to be changed or something like that with relation to that with foreign
Sure,
media?
sure. I mean, it's what you said. I completely agree with what you said with this kind of ideological battle being waged between the US and China at the moment for global control. And essentially, we're all a part of like a Marvel movie right now, right? Who's going to win? It's like Avengers Endgame. The US historically has always been a country who has um, I see it as physically colonized places through, freedom liberated wars, where they're basically saying, oh, we're going to bring you freedom, we're going to bring you democracy, and then all they bring you is basically soldiers on the ground, in a lot of the parts of the world. I think China is choosing to fight this battle intelligently, and they're doing what I term economic colonization. What they're doing is they're buying over countries with money, and the US is buying them over with this promise of being more enlightened, more free, and more democratic. And at the moment, I think both of them are failing because a lot of countries are seeing through this kind of they see through the actions that both these countries are conducting. However, China is maybe in the lead, in my opinion, right now, because a lot of these countries can't call them out because they're so dependent financially. Like you said, Pakistan and Sri Lanka, and there's heavy, heavy, heavy investments. Because obviously, at the end of the day, I don't envy the role of a government in our nations, only because at the end of the day, they have to feed the poor, right? And progress trumps sometimes sovereignty, which is not a good thing because sovereignty is very important to us. National pride should be very important to us. Yet at the same time, does it come at the cost of the common man starving because the country doesn't have any economic progression? And that's what China is like, this caring mother, caring father that kind of steps in and says, I will buy you with a few $1 billion, because they have that money. um, and so I think regionally it's going to be a tug of war for many, many years. But what I think that a lot of countries in our region need to focus on first and foremost is kind of generating that confidence in their own governments again. Because I think a lot of citizens, there's a coming back to the topic of social media, there are so many more memes that we see, and they're so funny. Every time something goes wrong, there will be 150 memes generated about it, and we will laugh about it and we will share it on our stories. But it's only funny because it's true, and that's what actually makes it really sad. So
Right.
we've become so desensitized to so many bad things happening all the time that we've just gone with it. Now everyone has dark humor. Everyone's going to post a meme about it and move on. So we'll be enraged for like 2 days, maybe three, maybe four. Like, is anyone even talking about the maritime disaster anymore? No, because we shared all of the dead turtle memes, and now we've moved on to the next worry. Are we going to go in lockdown? Are we going to be able to go to our friend's house? Our attention spans are so small. So
Right.
I can sit here and tell you a million things about what I think about regional politics, but the reason China is winning is because they're very focused. They don't have a small attention span, but they know people do. So they can buy all of the countries in the subcontinent, and all of us will protest for 5 minutes about the plaque having Chinese Mandarin on it. We will protest for seeing, Chinese soldiers in military uniforms for 2 minutes, and they know we will forget because there will be some other thing that we will be talking about, and in the meantime they're going to go ahead and do the thing that they want to do anyway. you know that is where they're very smart, and that is where they are winning. The USA is losing because over the last few years I think they had so much domestic strife within the USA, where they weren't, they were so polarized between the Democrats and the Republicans that they're taking all the time in the world to kind of bridge that gap. And in the meantime, China has stepped in, even Russia to a large extent. I think even with the global pandemic and the vaccine issue, I know I addressed it in another webinar that I did with a friend. I think on that we talked about global inequality being so much more magnified because of the vaccines. Even in Sri Lanka, we're still looking for AstraZeneca second doses. Now, Sputnik is coming in, Sinopharm is coming in, and the vaccine process is back underway. But it's all geopolitics, isn't it? Even when you're going to get vaccines, you're thinking about which vaccine am I getting? Is Saudi Arabia going to let me into the country if I have a Chinese vaccine? No, they're not, because they're not recognizing Sinovac. So should I get Pfizer instead? Is my government getting Pfizer? Will they get Pfizer? Will I get a second shot? So there's all of these. We don't realize it, but daily we're dealing with geopolitics without even knowing that we are dealing with geopolitics.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it would make more sense if we actually kept up to date with the things.
Right. Yeah, I think you said it really well once again, because how the vaccine rollout is happening even right now. If I'm not mistaken, the entire Kandy district was given the Russian Sputnik.
Yes.
So
Yes.
those people, they have no other hearsays. They cannot say anything about it. They don't, because right now people just want the vaccine, because
Yes.
they know that prevention is way more better than the cure itself.
True.
So I think it all comes down to one's spiritual, how can I say, faith,
Morality, yeah, also,
morality.
yeah.
Like, because when one person gets the dose, they feel okay, now I'm immune. And I think there's more biblical sense to life, taking the fact with this COVID vaccine and all, and this pandemic. I feel there's a lot of biblical aspect to this now, of for life rather.
Okay.
So again, like, not to make this political, not to make this spiritual, but it's just something which I feel, because because I know a lot of people who stayed on for so long without getting the vaccine, solely because they said, okay, I'm just at home, I'm working from home anyway, I'm not going to be exposed to this. And now when the death tolls are rising and everything's happening abruptly, they go to get the vaccine, and now that's because they have a fear that, okay, now I could be next. But once they get the jab, they are again out in the public saying, I'm vaccinated. So it's that little bit of faith that they need inside of them. Because I think you also would have seen how so many countries did not even inject the vaccine to the
Hmm.
people. And that was
True, true.
crazy when I came across it. And that's actually detrimental. You can kill a person if you inject air into the bloodstream.
True.
That can cause, like, brain damage and brain bleeds. It's way more dangerous than this pandemic, I think, but quicker in its cause. But I think we covered a lot in today's discussion that we had, and I think you and I, we can have more off the grid topics, because I felt that you were more favoring towards China, which I do not. So I think it's also because you come from the Pakistan and you represent them as well, of somewhat nature. So, and like we spoke, like, we are dependent on that money. We are dependent on those investments. So I think we must not be dependent upon anything, but as
100%.
yeah, but as a suffering nation, how we can rise up on our own is something which we need
True.
to look into. Like,
True.
sustainabilities, approvals of solar panels for people, all these things. So there was like so many projects that even I myself brought into the government. So, but so many are on delay, and all these things are happening. I don't know why. Is it because of politics don't want to develop, or is it because they don't get a share for themselves? Because we all know how solar systems work, we all know how wind energy works.
Mm.
There's nothing to go into the pockets, like when coal comes in ships to the country's harbor. So
Mm.
that's quite
I
sad.
think I just want to add something there. I think that it's something else. I think that it's linking back to what I said earlier. I think it's a question of, for example, if you and I are working on a project and our families never got along, let's say, for years and years and years, and you and I have to work together. And so I bring an idea. You might think my idea is good, but you know that my grandfather said something negative to your grandfather 100 years ago. So you're like, I don't really want to support her idea, so I'm just going to put a block in it because
Right.
of your loyalty and your support. And the same way, if you say something, I'm going to disagree with you, not based on principle, but I'm going to disagree with you based on ideology because I have to be loyal to my camp. If you notice something, a lot of politicians in real life are personal friends, even if they sit on separate aisles in parliament. So they have dinner together, they party together, they attend birthday parties for family members. And Some of us know those things because, we are aware of the social circles in which they mingle because we are privileged. But the common man, for the common man, politics is almost like theater. For the common man, you have this fiery rhetoric. I will not let that happen. I will not let this happen. And then, oh, how are you? How is your children? You know, I don't think I mean, you're right. It sometimes, of course, corruption is definitely a reality. But I do think that sometimes human nature and stubbornness and this need to project an image based on party politics is what stops things from happening. It's almost like ego, it's stubbornness, because that government did it, I'm going to cancel it. Or whatever this government does, the next one that comes into place is going to cancel what they did. So that's why a country doesn't progress, because you're constantly tag teaming in and out of power, and nobody is carrying forward the good things just based on ideology. Again, maybe I'm simplifying it a little too much, but I do think that that has a lot to do with it as well. And it's really sad because ultimately the people in the country, no matter what party they support, are still the people of this country, right? And I find it interesting that I'm of that opinion because I'm someone who went to school here. For all 16 years of my education were in Sri Lanka. I did my degree abroad and I came back to work in Sri Lanka. So I have so much to give this country because of my love for it. But the people here sometimes are so internally divided, as is the case even in Pakistan. Party politics divides everyone. Pakistan, you have so many political parties. India, you have Congress and BJP, two complete polar opposites. So I think it's human nature to be divided, to feel like you're a part of a certain camp. And if you're part of that camp, you have to stay so loyal to that camp that it doesn't matter what the other person is saying or doing. You're only listening to be able to argue. You are not listening to be able to try and implement, which is what the problem, I think, is. I think if we let our ego go, which is very idealistic, and I don't think it'll happen anytime soon. But
Yeah.
I think I wish if we did that, it would be better.
Yeah, if we don't, I'm pretty sure that the next generation will look to a third force of power,
I agree.
especially
Yeah.
in this country, because you mentioned how a certain project gets cancelled when a new project comes out, when a
Yeah.
new government comes out, rather. Sorry.
Yes.
So I think even I also made that out because there was this light rail project which during the
Yes.
previous government came in, and because Japan was asked to take back the fundings, and again it's the same project with Chinese fundings once again, and we had to pay like 5.8 billion to Japan solely because of the reputation damage. So I think if we put aside our ego and our political party politics itself, I think we can create a much wider and a more vibrant nation, coming up.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
I remember when I grew up in this country, the war was going on, and I felt like there were th- there was such a case of, obviously minorities feeling very threatened, feeling very sidelined, even when I was growing up. I think that's still the case even now. But I do think, in a sense, I don't know, maybe I remember it differently because I feel like the young people growing up in this time are just exposed to a lot more open racism, a lot more conflict, not just in this country. I'm talking globally. I'm talking in a global context. I think people are just braver in their racism. People are less apologetic about not being good. And I think when we were growing up, that wasn't necessarily the case. There was still some decorum. There was still some case of pretense and not coming across as being so belligerent and violent in our opinions. But I think now that's not the case. And I think even with, you mentioned projects being cancelled and ego and stubbornness, and I think that all stems from the fact that we've really lost this ability to see what unites us, and we're focused more on what divides us. And I think it's just a change in mindset, isn't it? I think if we really stop to go back to a more positive mindset, we would progress a lot quicker. I'm hoping it'll happen, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think so. You worked as a lawyer before as well, so why don't you
I
run
did.
for office?
Oh, I wish. I really wish I'm a Pakistani citizen, and it's very difficult for me to get citizenship in this country, which is the problem. Otherwise, given the chance, I would love to.
So there is, with the 20th Amendment, dual citizens can contest.
But I'm not a dual citizen because I'm a Pakistani national, so there's no way for me to get citizenship in this country. If there was, then, but then I did the next best thing. I thought, well, if I can't be a politician, then I can be a teacher and I can teach all of my students to grow up to be better politicians.
Right. That's great. That's actually a great point of view. Wow. Okay. So I think that's a wrap. I
Great.
just want to thank you for your time on speaking with me,
No
and I
problem.
hope you be heard through this platform.
No, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. And I hope that we speak on many different topics in the future as well. I really enjoyed it.
Right. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye bye.